Okay, we are starting with, got to minimize this. All right, we are back to week 2, and today's focus is story time, as it says here. So the CICK October podcast and broadcast series is brought to you in partnership with Smithers Public Library, Houston Public Library, and the Learning Shop in Hazleton as well. I've mentioned to a few people when this Zoom started that if you wouldn't mind dropping your email in the chat, just so that I can grab it if I've not already sent you an email, to send me a personal message, make that chat message out to Glenn Ingram, however, because I'm using his Zoom. So we can get started here. Just a quick recap from last week. So I have making sweet music with spoken word. And so this was Laura Gilliam's presentation about the combination of using music and spoken word when you're trying to tell a story. We also went over the show types. So I have 2 listed here, live and recorded. Obviously, there are more examples of types of shows, but really when it boils down to the simplest way that you want to start crafting your show, do you want to do it live or do you want to do it recorded? A tip to know is that if it's live, you're going to put more work in the show before it happens. And if it's recorded, then typically all of your work happens after the show has been recorded. We also helped you find music for your show. And so that's either using Free Music Archive. And as well, CICK members have access to a couple of databases, and we use Trello, Plex, and those create our CICK digital library. So if you become a member, then you get access to those. We also briefly talked about some microphone technique. Remember, don't eat it. And if it's new equipment to you, you shouldn't feel confused, or you shouldn't feel like you can't ask somebody to help you figure out how to use that equipment. And sometimes that somebody is as simple as YouTube. So don't fear or feel like you need to know all the tech before you start recording your show, because that's what the World Wide Web is actually very useful for. I did give you a take home, which was listen to a show on CICK or a podcast that uses good style production or clever audio bits, or that they have a compelling conversation or interviews, and to think about what you liked about it and why. So for the sake of time, you can either drop a link to the show that you listened to in the chat, or however, I'm going to stay at the end of the meeting for about 10 minutes or so, and we can talk about your show, the shows that you liked or that you listened to then. And again, we can talk about more questions as well. So we were looking at, thank you. So looking at this week, we're looking at how to prepare yourself and your guest to be recorded. It's not the only thing that we're going to go over, but this is the first thing that I'd like to go over. So if in this podcast you find it helpful to jot things down, again, I do upload these as videos in a couple days after this workshop takes place. So that will be there, but just to go over it kind of one by one. So for yourself, to prepare yourself for speaking in the microphone, do some reading. You can read interviews, make notes of good questions that you've read, and reading allows there to only be one speaker at a time. So this kind of also helps you be a better listener for your guest, because you're really only taking in one piece of information at a time. Listen to the interviews and practice the style of that interviewer if you like. There are certain shows that I really like a lot because of who the host is. And we all have our own tastes and styles of speaking, but I have examples later on of some of my favorite speakers, and we can briefly speak why about that. And I'm hoping too that in the moments after this workshop, if you want to have a chat, that you have some examples of people that you really like listening to as well. Don't over plan things if you can avoid it. This really should be fun. So it's probably a really annoying piece of advice for type A's, but truly you do the research that you need. But the beauty of podcasts and the beauty of radio is if you leave room for happy accidents and tangential mentions of something, so that you and your guest can actually kind of go off in a bit of unexplored territory, if that is part of your podcast style. Apologies, there we go. So now, depending on your show style, you may need to keep it to the facts, but unless you're making a really hard-hitting news podcast, you're allowed to be yourself and to be human and hold conversation rather than just spewing data if that's not what your show really, really needs to be. I have here jot down your talking points. Maybe don't write your questions verbatim, because you just come off sounding very robotic, and it maybe makes your guest feel like they should have prepared with written answers if aren't able to make eye contact with them, or you're not really able to connect with them at all. So, but I always do talking points because I do tend to rely on my notes quite a lot. Build a rapport with your guest. So before you turn the microphones on, and again, and this comes with the caveat that you have to let your guest know that your microphones are on, but let them know, because it might be easier to already have them on to start your interview. That way you can be natural and yourself. But then a lot of people, when you say, okay, now we're going to turn the mics on, they they even change the way they sit, and then they start speaking in their podcast voice, and you're like, no, it was so good, I wish we could have kept that. So again, this comes with that you have to be very clear with this, that the microphones are on, but I'm testing for sound, because you should test for sound, which means you're listening to their volume and you want to make sure that everybody's coming in equally and no one's blown out or anything. But that just gives you a much easier intro to the actual more formal interview part. Also, if you let your guest know, as you should let your guest know that you've been recording, sometimes there's funny little, what we call cold open moments, where you can use something that's not specific to what you're going to be speaking to your guest about. But it's a funny moment that is a really great piece of audio, and you'd like to incorporate that in your show. So again, but you can only do that if they didn't think that they were talking off the record. And another thing with I have B-sides, B-roll, and tangents as well, is just kind of a second point here. But you can add fun elements to your show to get your guest thinking differently if you need to. And so it could be really little things like trivia or word games, or you ask them a story that, again, it doesn't have anything to specifically do with the topic that they're maybe there to speak of, tell a joke, or just something to cut the monotony if you feel like your show is a bit of a dry rub, maybe because of the subject matter, or maybe because of the the way that it just happens to be that you're going to be asking a lot of information sharing, and it's not really as conversational as you like. It's okay to stop in the middle of something, let them know that we're about to think differently, which means we're even about to talk a little bit differently, and then you can go back into it. I kind of like doing that in between things because it gives you a moment to breathe. A lot of people we don't breathe normally when we speak publicly or speak into a microphone, and that gives you a moment to just take it all down and let yourself have just a freaking breath for a moment. Next slide. So for your guest, a way to prepare, ask them to prepare and help them speak into the microphone is give them notes about yourself in the show. So as a courtesy, don't make them Google you. Don't make them say, oh, she said she was from Smithers Community Radio. Send a link. So just give the information that's necessary. Please don't inundate them with too much, which I believe is the next point. But again, don't make them do that work for your show. Give them talking points. So let them know what you're going to be talking about, but you don't have to send them the questions ahead of time. It's not because you want to catch them in a lie or something like that, or it's gotcha, but it sounds more natural if they know what they're going to be speaking on, because you've given them the opportunity to prepare maybe some talking points, but they didn't, they're not waiting for you to ask question 8 because they're really excited to talk about question 8. You can also ask them if there's things that they want to contribute to your show. Are there specific topics that they'd like to cover or songs that they'd like to incorporate into the show? They might show you something awesome that you never considered, or at least you get a view into their interests without having to say, so what are your interests? And it it's almost a bit of an icebreaker as well. And I really like incorporating people into the production of the show. And it's also just more fun to kind of share that control a little bit. Also, give them time to speak. I myself am one of those people that I get really excited when people start talking about ideas. Like if you've ever talked to me at Smithers Brewing, I'm like, and I just really want to like share my ideas too. And if you're like that, it's a conscious effort, and active listening is so much different from like, I can't wait until I can say my next thing. So give them, again, you can practice that breathing while you're listening. And I find that sometimes taking notes when someone is speaking is a really good way for me to catch on to what they've said, so that maybe then we can formulate the next talking point together. But it's so, so important to find a way to be a good listener. And as mentioned, I find that taking notes makes me a better listener, and just slowing down and breathing. I'm going to move my cat's butt here for a second. Okay. Oh, so here's some examples. It's 1/4 after, so I think we have time. So I'm going to play some examples of different interview styles, and just a couple of quick points about why I like them.
We'll stop talking about cream and we'll start talking about broadcaster, TV guy, artist, podcaster, Jesus, high achiever, clearly, and author of the books Loose Units and Electric Blue, Paul Verhoeven.
Hi, it's not so much overachieving as it's basically just career ADHD is what it is. I just sort of see shiny things and I run it.
So after everything that I just said, here's something that I really like about Jo Thornley and the podcast Zealot, just in total, is that she's like she's not overly professional. This is a very share information podcast. It's people talking about cults, and it's really informative, and they do quite a bit of research, but she's very jokey. The host Jo is very jokey, and she's someone who makes it feel like you're sitting at her kitchen table with her when she's having these interviews. So she's very I wouldn't call her warm, but she's affable. I find her extremely affable, and I'll be walking and laughing out loud to this podcast. I have another one, which is my favorite, maybe my favorite podcast of all time, maybe. And it's called This Is Love. And Phoebe Judge is a voice that I could listen to forever. But what I want you to listen to in, again, this example is what makes this maybe not such a perfect way to have a conversation, but how engaging I genuinely find this conversation that she's having.
I mean, I call things what they are. There are names for things.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt it really briefly, and just they do, in this clip that I'm playing, there's a mention of a anatomy in its correct terminology, but then there's spelling of not correct terminology of those. So if you have young people in the room, maybe send them away. It's not lewd or anything, but I just thought I'd say that now.
That are acceptable names in the dictionary.
Is there an example of a word? I mean, you don't have to say it, but you could spell it, just so we have an idea of what words you will not use.
I could spell it. Really?
Or
spell it.
Or you could say it. I want to give you any.
No, I didn't know I could say it.
You can say anything. Oh yes, you can say anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, like a penis. Is that permissible to say that?
Oh yes, you can say much worse than that. You could actually say any word in the world because we're not live.
Okay, because okay, like a penis. Okay, in some books, there are COCK, there are DICK. I'm spelling it out because even I won't even say it. But anyway, but that's but if I refer, I will call it a manhood. In my book, I'll call it a shaft. And that's as far as I will take it.
How did you first figure out how to write a sex scene? Did you, because I'm thinking about it right now, and I wouldn't know in the whole world how to go about that. Did you do any
Really?
research? I've never, no, the thought terrifies me. Did you have to do any?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have to do any research?
No.
So something about this show, This Is Love, is it's interview based. It's all very interview based, and it's got that woven narrative style that I was talking about last week. But you listen to Phoebe, and this is the opening of the episode. This is how it actually opens. Her guest is not introduced by name right away. There's very little context given, and it starts into this conversation that they're having, and she's like almost interrupting her guest, and she's using incomplete sentences, and she's laughing at herself, and she's trying to find the words at the time. And so these are all imperfections, but this is something that in radio and podcasting, there can be a charm to it, and you're allowed to be yourself very much. And so I think that that's a really good example of someone who, she's a beautiful podcaster. She's got like one of the yummiest voices, but she's also, it sounds like she's allowing herself to figure it out, because this was one of the earlier episodes. And lastly, I'm going to play an example from one of CICK's shows called The Influence of Wiggly Air with host Brendan McKinnon.
Yeah, you're hearing the fan in the background because I don't care about exterior noise because I'm so hot. Yeah, this is Brendan McKinnon. I am back with another show with the fan in the back. As a matter of fact, this is The Influence of Wiggly Air. You were listening, but my hair blowing in the wind. Yeah, this is going from 0 to 10. But I'm gonna play some songs before my guest shows up. So the first song I'm gonna play is a Tyler the Creator song, because this album just dropped. You know, it just dropped. So here we go. Check it. This is Lumberjack. This one's short. Here we go.
So I didn't keep the song, obviously, but what we do have here is someone who is he's making his show, and I would say that that's more of a podcasty style. I think when people think about radio and when they think of podcasts, there's two different approaches to it. A lot of people, when they think of radio too, they really just can't think of outside of commercial radio, which has like generally a very ingenuine sounding host, laughing with like mirthfully, like just like someone who's just not even having a good time. Like I picture commercial radio hosts as laughing without like making any expression on their face, like that's hilarious, dude. And it's just like they're not having fun because they're being paid to laugh. But Brennan and many hosts on CICK, they just get into this rhythm eventually where you know that it's just you and the microphone, and you're just putting this sound out there, and you're thinking about your audience, and you're hoping that it's someone who's also sweating and who doesn't have air conditioning, and we live in Smithers, and why was it so hot this summer? And so something that I really like about that is that he doesn't really have a preciousness about the way that he does his show. So we are about to go into our first presentation here. And so our guest presenter, he's going to introduce himself in this video here. So unfortunately, Dan couldn't be with us live today because he had another engagement. So he and I had this conversation earlier in the day. So I'm going to play this from YouTube, which is where I have it. And again, if you'd like to reference it, this is going to be on YouTube for you as well. And Dan's going to speak about journalism, resources, any of the resources that he mentions. I have links to them, so I will send those to you in the chat, so you don't have to worry about feverishly writing anything down too fast. So we're going to go into that, and then we will be coming out, and I'm going to be speaking a little more about what to prepare next week, and hopefully we can have a little more of a conversation as well than this one-sided one. So Megan, is this looking good?
Perfect.
Thanks. Okay. Hey there, Dan. Can you introduce yourself for our participants here?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Daniel Mesec. I am a journalist with CICK News and the host of our CICK News show here in Smithers.
Excellent. So as you know, I've asked you to be a presenter today because I want to talk about and maybe they don't have a ton of experience with it. So I was hoping that we could just break it down into some actual kind of step-by-step and helpful tips as to approaching the interview and then what to do with it after and to contextualize it.
Sure.
So what I'd like to start knowing is, how do you approach interviews? Because you do quite a range of the style of interviews that you do. So what would you say your kind of general approach is?
Yeah, I guess I could even start with some technical advice.
Sure.
A lot of journalists out there will often keep notes and take notes while they're interviewing. I do that sometimes if the situation or circumstances provides the time and space to do that. But my style is more conversational. I find that a lot of times when you run up to someone and you have something prepared or start taking notes right away, they don't necessarily give you the same answers as they would just in having a conversation. So having a voice recorder of some kind is usually the best. The phones these days have a voice recorder on it, so it's really easy just to pull out even your phone. If you're doing a basic story, written story, even an audio story, the sound is pretty good. So everything I do is always recorded. That's also part of, I would, call it a journalistic principle of making sure that things are on the record, and you need a physical record of that. And so making sure that you record it is always priority number one. You need to have a physical record so you can, be able to go back to that and reference it and make sure that it's accurate if you're using it in a print story for, say, a quote or whatnot. Or, of course, if you're doing audio, you want to have some clean sound in these clips that you can put into the audio story. So that being said, once you have that, in your pocket, carrying it around, whatever it is, the first thing I would do to approach an interview is if you have a story idea and you've figured out what your hook to the story is, you figure out who the players are. For instance, there's a story coming up that we'll be doing on the salmon crisis and the steelhead issue here. And there are two political people in particular that will be speaking about this. And so those would be two great interviews. And once you kind of figure that out, depending on who they are, if they're more of a high profile individual like a politician, you usually need to send a request into their office so you can set up an official interview. So once you figure that out, who your audiences or who your interviews are going to be, you send out those requests. And once you have that secured, then you can dive into doing a little bit of research and trying to figure out, one, what is the hook and what are the issues that people are interested in that you'd like to ask about? And then two, who are these individuals that you're speaking with? You want to make sure that you're informed and have a little bit of background research to understand where these people are coming from so that you can tailor your questions to that individual and to the situation and the story.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So where do you get your ideas for stories then?
Honestly, everywhere and anywhere. One thing is, a good journalist is just a curious person by nature, I'd say. And so that being said, personally, I just follow many things, many news agencies. Obviously, social media is kind of the main communication highway these days. So, stuff like Instagram, Facebook, not to say that it is a place where you can accredit specific information, but if you see a news article or if you see someone posting something about said issue, it just at least piques your interest. One thing as well, oftentimes you see headlines that are maybe a little bit misleading. That's a big issue as well. Those could lead to stories in themselves. But I think a lot of the time, where I get story ideas from are one, people who get in touch with me, say, hey, this such and such thing is happening, might be something you should cover, or two, something that I just find in my daily scrummaging of information. And I guess the other one too is just intake of information. If you read lots, if you check out multiple news outlets every day, surf the social media, there will inevitably be something that pops up that will pique your interest. But that's just the starting point. You need to dig into it and find your own information, connect with the people who would know more about that story, or if it's, for instance, something that's science-based, you need to speak to an authority on that issue. But again, these story ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's something too that is important to impart on the participants here, is that it's okay to follow, to let something like Facebook or a post on social media be the seed of the idea, but that's never the story. The story isn't that it's a Facebook story. You have every right as a journalist to ask and inquire, but for people who aren't journalists, they might not feel like they have that that organization behind them to back asking for it. But I think that if your approach is, I'm going to say neutral, but it's also professional-ish sounding, that I'm always surprised at the people who say yes to my interviews, especially because I'm new at being a journalist and working in the news realm. And so for the participants here who they're not sure if they're allowed to ask someone, you're allowed to ask someone. The worst they're going to say is no. Okay, so we are rounding up for our time, and I did want to help with some resources. So I'd asked you to prepare a sample of how you ask someone for an interview. I have one of my own, but would you like to share yours first, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I can share mine really quickly here, and I will say there, for anyone who's kind of new to this business and trying to get into journalism, you don't necessarily need to go to J school to be, quote unquote, a journalist. The first thing, and many people have said this to me over the years, just start writing. If you're interested and curious about something, you start writing. There are a lot of online resources. The Poynter Institute, the Canadian Association of Journalists is another one. Also, you can check out CBC's code of ethics as well, and their principles. These will all lead you down the road to figure out kind of what you want to do as a journalist and how to prepare for an interview of sorts, or to how to find a source. The Canadian Association of Journalists is a great resource. They have lots of stuff on there to help you kind of figure this stuff out, and also how to write pitches, and how to contact people that you want to get interviews with. These days, I've kind of found over the years that it's better to be very quick and to the point with your request for an interview, especially from an official source.
Yes.
So I'm just going to show you a quick kind of exchange in particular here that I dealt with earlier this year. So hopefully you can see that. So this is a quick interview request exchange by email with a DFO official. And, as you can see, I'm a journalist based in Smithers, wondering if I could speak to you about the recent announcement from the Gitxsan Hereditary Chiefs regarding the ban on non-Indigenous anglers for their territories this season. I'm curious to know what DFO's position is on this move by the GHC, and if there will be any resolution or continuation of talks before the season begins. Would it be possible to schedule an interview with you in the next few days? My contact is below. Thank you, Dan. And so as you can see, my contacts are below, in my email, my phone number. And I got a quick response back from Davis. So pretty straight boilerplate. And again, it's just an example of that. You put out a request. Sometimes the request comes back positive and you have a person that you can speak with and use for a story. Other times you get something like this that is a small comment or a statement, but someone who declines the interview.
Well, and also that I just wanted to say that it's important to note there that in that previous email, that in your subject line in that email, you're already letting them know what you want to be speaking about, that you're asking for an interview request. You get to it, you know her name, so you mention her name and you just let her know generally what the conversation is going to be about, because I think that's also powerful too, is to not make the person that you're asking for the interview, don't make them do a lot of work. your
Yeah.
links are there. They can find out, they know the organization that you're working for. And yeah, I think that's important as well. Yeah. And also too, something that just isn't in those emails that I would also note is very helpful to let your interviewee know is that if it's a live interview or a recorded interview. I've started doing that where I say this is going to be a recorded interview, a recorded phone call interview. It won't be live. And I just let them know that piece of context as well. Okay, Dan, lastly was I had made a little bit of a slide to just go over the structure of from when you get the idea to having a finished piece. So I'm actually just going to share my screen here really quickly. And maybe you just want to speak on this really. So can you see what I've shared?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just very briefly, just kind of go through this process with the participants as well.
Yeah, sure. So as you can see at the top there in blue, the hook or idea, that's kind of where you got to start from. So one is the hook and the idea, and these things can be, controversial, or they could be, just a check-in with something new. So you come up with the hook or the idea of the story first, and then try to figure out who you want to speak with, who would be able to illustrate in an interview this idea of a story. And so you always want to have more than one person, at least. 2 people is great, 2 or more is better, because you want to make sure that one, you have both sides of the story or all 3 sides of the story. You never want to just have a single source story. That is terrible journalism, in my opinion. You always want to make sure, if possible, you can get 2 people. Having one person kind of lay out a particular point of view is great, but you got to make sure that you get a second point of view as well if you can't nail a second person with that particular piece altogether. So multiple interviews is a priority, if you will. And then, of course, context. You want to do some research. You want to figure out what's the background to this story in particular. You don't just want to come into it with just straight interviews, unless those interviews help you create that context. A lot of the time we do research, we write a script so that we can set the story up, and then here's who we're speaking to today. And then finally, once you have all the pieces, the recordings, the voiceovers, the script, you put it all together in your edit suite, and you want to make it compelling. You also want to make it interesting to listen to, and you want to make it clear and concise. With radio, you're always creating an atmosphere. You want to bring people into the story. That's the one thing that radio does very well, and podcasting does very well. You can create this amazing atmosphere with sounds from the ground, water, a protest, all kinds of things that you can create this atmosphere to bring people into the story, so you make them feel like they're there. And then once you put it all together, you listen to it over and over and over again. You try to refine it as best as possible before you release it to the wide world, and making sure that you cover the principal basis, that you're being accurate, that there's transparency, that you have all sides of the story, and that it's clear and concise.
That's right. Well, I really appreciate this, Dan. I think that this is really helpful information, whether or not someone is approaching an interview as a news person or as a reporter / journalist, or if they're just considering doing interviews as a part of their podcast or radio show. I just think that this is generally very helpful. So for our participants here, Dan is going to make just a list of some of those resources that he mentioned as well. And so I'll share that with you in the presentation notes at the end of this workshop. Dan, thanks so much for giving me the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I really enjoyed our conversation. And of course, if anybody out there has any questions or wants to follow up, they can always reach me at danielmesec@gmail.com. I'm always open to chat about journalism, and anybody who's new to this and wants to kind of get into the game. Definitely living in a small community is different reporting tactics and principles than living in a big city or a big center. I love it, and we need more of it. So if you have any questions or you want to follow up, please reach out.
Okie dokie. So I'm just going to drop, I'm just going to drop this to everyone. And these are the resources from Dan. So that's his email address, and then the CAJ Poynter Institute, Canadian Journalism Project, all that sort of stuff. And that, again, should just be kind of a hopefully helpful Sorry. No, it's going to be more me if I don't find a way to escape this. There we go. There we go. And yeah, and I find that sometimes you can get inundated with resources, but if you're someone who is interested, or if you're someone who's working with people who are interested in doing interviews, and you want to do it right, and you are someone who likes to get those kind of you like to get it right, and you want to kind of have as much information as possible, especially when it comes to the regards of ethics, and perhaps you're going to be interviewing people about maybe topics that you're not very familiar with, or you're not sure if it's your job to be able to share that story, though it's important to read as much as you can on it then, and then just feel really secure in the questions that you're going to be asking. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to go to the next one. Okay, making a show skeleton. Also, I apologize if this is just like rapid fire in my voice and rapid fire information. As I mentioned, I do want to hear from you, and I hope that this is just kind of a bundle of info. And then if you want to hang out after these presentations and workshops, that we can actually do a little more collaborative, and I can hear your ideas, and you can help each other with questions and answers as well. But making a show skeleton. So this is something that I feel like generally gets overlooked, because you've been thinking about your show for so long, and you're so dang excited to get it going. And you just want to start instead of planning, but this is a very small step to plan. And I really suggest, and really have found it, that it's the way that I make all of my podcasts anymore now, is I generally try to plan out the entire arc of the season. Now, even if you're someone that's thinking about doing a podcast that's not going to be in seasons, it's not a series, it is a ongoing, lifetime commitment, it still isn't bad to give yourself some constructs with which to make your show. So maybe you want to look at it as the first 3 months, and then 6 months and a year, and that sort of thing. But do give yourself limitations, because that actually just gives you some kind of hard lines for you to be as creative as possible within, without it could be everything for everybody. Like, you'll just get completely overwhelmed, and you probably won't start, to be honest. So I do have an example here. And this was actually a shared show skeleton, which I was very happy that we had both thought that this was equally as important. So the show is called A Room of Her Own. And so, so what we have here is, we just wrote who we were, the show, the duration. So we decided on how long we wanted each of these episodes to be, a description of it. And then we just broke it down by episodes, and we even titled the episodes, because it just gave us, again, it just kind of restricted it, that this is roughly what we were going to try to be talking about. And so we had created our season to be 8, with hopefully a bonus episode, and we were thinking that maybe that would be a way that we could, like, we could do a bonus episode for like some fundraising or something like that. And then even if we had more ideas that we weren't totally in love with, but we quite liked, we still added those to the show skeleton. So in here, it's just, if you do this, and especially I really suggest that that you do this, especially if you share your show, you're doing it with a partner, or you're doing it with a co-host, that you just give yourself a template of how you're going to start doing this work. If anyone wants a copy of this, I don't know if you want like the specifics of of this show specifically, but I can actually just take everything out, and you're free to just use this template. Again, it's very simple. Okay, I see a thumbs up there, so I'm happy to share that template with you as well, and I'll do that at the end of the podcast, or sorry, the workshop. Well, there we go. This is just a bad version of it. Okay, everybody, I'm so happy that we're talking about next week, because this week was, I think, quite a bit of things that you could do. And I feel like with all this coulding, it makes you feel like you're going to start shoulding, and then you wish you would have started it. So I'm wanting to give you an assignment for next week, because even though next week is the last workshop in this series, your learning doesn't have to end there. So in a moment, I'm going to talk about the assignment. But before we do that, I want to let you know what what options exist beyond this workshop series that you can start working on that podcast idea that you have, that that radio show idea that you have. So CICK offers one-on-one or small group training to create a show. You can apply to become a programmer by making a show proposal, which is typically your next step in training. It's much like making that show skeleton, is you are going to put it on paper what your show idea is. Now, we're not in the business of pushing you into anything too soon, trust me, but I'll tell you this. Your show won't become a show unless you leap into it with even just a little bit of blindness. It's never going to be perfectly ready, and you'll second guess yourself when you're starting out. But I can tell you from years of training people in new media skills that the most successful storytellers that I've ever met are the people who just start doing it at one point. You stop overthinking it and you stop planning it, and you start recording something. So I'm going to send you a link in the chat here for the application if you want to write, if you want to even just download it just to read what we're looking at when we're asking you to do an application. But I also have an assignment for you. So before we go, yep.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I've been getting kicked off this entire time. Sorry.
So was it you were kicked off?
Yeah, I was kicked off 3 times.
Oh no. Oh,
Good.
and is this Jordan that's speaking to me right now?
Yeah. it's
Okay,
me,
hey
but-
Jordan, that's okay. If did you drop your email in the chat? Because I
Yeah,
record.
I direct messaged you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna email you and I'm gonna send you the link that has this whole thing, and it'll be on YouTube. Okay, so you can go back and review it. Then I'm sorry that happened to you.
It's okay.
So let's see. So so just what we're going to go over next week. So we're going to cover creating an aim for your show, which means that you're going to really boil down what your show is about and what it's trying to achieve and what methods you're going to use to achieve that. We have another guest speaker, really excited about it. It's a creative writer. Well, actually, she's a script writer as well. But we're talking about getting creative and fictional podcast writing and fictional writing with, her name's Anne-Marie Hack. She's from Houston originally. I see Edward did a big face to that, so I'm really excited about that face. But she's going to talk about doing fictional writing, because I think that what we've been kind of focusing on generally is that that you're going to be asking questions and there's going to be answers and you can use voiceover. But what if you just want to do something completely different? I don't want you to feel like this isn't the right workshop for you. So we're going to be talking about that. And then also we're going to give you a couple, some resources and some places to actually do some of this recording to, again, hopefully encourage you to start that next step and take that big leap. Excuse me. So here's the assignment for next week is create audio. I don't care how you do it. You can use your phone, you can use your earbuds and the microphone that you use to talk when you're going for a walk. You can use one of our remote stations, no matter which. If you're in Hazleton, Houston, or Smithers, we have places that you can use. We've got Zoom, we can help you work through this. But I want you to record something for next week. So here on this page, I have some options listed for you, but this isn't an exhaustive list. So feel free to play around and make something that feels good to you. And again, this is hopefully something that I was thinking maybe we could all chat about if you want to stay on the call for a little bit longer. But I have some options here for you. You can make a trailer. You can record an interview. You can fake an intro, or you can just introduce yourself. Just put on the mic and introduce yourself as if you're introducing yourself to people who you can't see, they can't see you. You very likely will never meet in person, but find those talking points and what it is about you that you want to present on air. Again, I say on air, but this could also be a different style of pre-recorded podcast. It's fine, but I say air because it kind of just resonates in my head as the place to do this. Kind of going backwards to forwards, because I just talked about what to do for introducing yourself. This can be 10 seconds long. This can be a minute long. These don't have to be perfect, and they don't have to be I'm not asking you to make a full episode of anything. Faking an intro. So as we heard in that Zealot clip that I did, you could hear it was a little bit of music, and then you hear her intro music is some intro music, and then she just says, "Oh, Zealot." Like that's her intro. So you can pretend like you can make an intro for a show that you don't even plan on actually making, but something that you just think would be, you find some music using Free Music Archive, and you record yourself saying, "Hi, this is me, this is my show, this is what it's about, welcome, let's get to it." And again, or you could record an interview. So if you do have someone that you want to practice an interview with, go for it and practice that interview. And then if you really want like all the gold stars that we possess, you could make a trailer for a show that you actually do want to do. But that one's kind of a bit of a big ask. And we might not be there yet with some people, because that would take a little more editing skills. So please, I encourage you to record something. If you need help with it, again, I'm dropping my email address. Again, my name's Pam, so it's cackproducer@gmail.com. I'm dropping my email address in here. And I want to make it very clear that it doesn't bother me at all when you email me about anything that we've talked about in here, or anything that I've spoken about here. It makes me actually very excited, because it makes me feel like we're all engaged with each other, even though we're doing this. I'm speaking to my computer, when obviously I'd rather be speaking to a room of people, and we would be having fun and being able to make that connection. So that is good. Michelle, I did see your question here. So do I expect you to do some editing? If you can do some editing, absolutely. That's why making a trailer is the first, but also the last thing that I mentioned, is because it might be over some people's heads, but if you have some editing experience, yeah, sure, go for it. I'd love to hear an edit, a cut or two, but otherwise, yeah, just don't even worry about the music part. Just again, record yourself introducing yourself. That would be great on its own. Okay, almost there, everybody. Oh, related, unrelated. Tell your tale on CICK. Here's something that you could do if you want to record something for us as well, is I really want to play scary stories on CICK Fresh on October 31st. Please don't make them gruesome, because and don't swear, because this is radio and we don't want to hear swearing at noon on a Sunday. But if you have a scary story, you can just record yourself just saying it as if you're telling a friend over the phone. I don't, be creative or be very plain, but if you have a scary story that you really like to tell, or something that you've made up, or it's a traditional one that everybody likes, make that your scary story, because I will play it on air if you do. Again, as long as it's not mean-spirited or horribly terrifying in a gruesome and vivid way. Now, again, I've mentioned, so we have actually 8 minutes left on this workshop, which is great news. Or they can make a sweeper. Sorry, Megan, I'm just seeing your excellent point here. You can also make a sweeper for CICK, which is this script right here. Hi, this is your name, and you're listening to CICK 93.9 FM Smithers Community Radio. That would be amazing. And Megan, this is why I love you so much. And that's a great idea, because that's a simple thing. Again, you can do it on your phone, and you can email it to me, or save it for next week, and we can, and I can play them if you want, or if you just want to send it to me, and then we can just do some feedback one-on-one. That sounds great too. But a sweeper is a fantastic idea. Okay, I'm going to take a big drink of water, and I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I did have one. Oh, I sent you the link to the application. And sorry, I just want to make sure that I gave you everything you need. Yep. Okay, good. So that's the end of this workshop. For anyone that wants to or has to leave, thank you so much for participating. I'm going to share the link for next week, is the Zoom link for next week. I'm going to share that with the emails that you've sent us. and or that you sent to me in the chats here. And please stick around. I'm going to stick around for another like 10-ish minutes, and we will yeah, we can chat about ideas, or again, if you did listen to a podcast this week or a radio show, let's talk about that as well. So please feel free to unmute yourself and let's go hog wild.